One locked door. That is all it would have taken to keep the Roman Empire alive for another 1,000 years past 1453. We ran the simulation. Saving it turned out to be one of the most dangerous decisions in the entire timeline. Constantinople, May 29, 1453, 0400 hours. One gate stands between 11 centuries of empire and total collapse. AXIOM has run this timeline 11,300 times. In most of them, the walls fall, and the last emperor of Rome dies in the street, his body never identified. But in one branch, the gate stays shut. This is that branch. AXIOM, simulation engine online. To understand the variable, you first have to understand the wall it almost broke. For 11 centuries, the Theodosian walls kept Constantinople standing while Rome burned, while the Huns turned back under Attila without ever testing them directly, while two separate Arab sieges broke themselves against the Bosphorus in the 7th and 8th centuries, triple-layered. An outer moat, a lower wall, an inner wall standing over 30 feet tall. Historians still call it the most effective defensive fortification ever built by a pre-gunpowder civilization. By 1453, the walls were still standing. The empire behind them was not. Byzantium had shrunk from a civilization that once stretched across 3 continents down to a single city and a strip of coastline. Historians estimate the population sheltering inside those walls at roughly 50,000 people, many of them elderly, clergy, or refugees already displaced from provinces the empire had lost decades earlier. Outside the walls stood an Ottoman army historians place at somewhere between 60 and 80,000 men, commanded by a 21-year-old sultan named Mehmed II. A ruler who had staked his entire legitimacy on capturing the one city his predecessors had failed to take for 800 years. He had something they never had, a cannon nobody else in Europe could build. A Hungarian engineer named Orban had offered his design to Constantine XI first. The emperor could not afford it. Mehmed could, and paid for a bombard that could fire a stone the size of a horse over a mile. For 53 days, that cannon hammered walls that had never been fully breached by force in their entire history. On the night of May 28th, the defenders carried their most sacred icons through the streets in a final procession, past walls now scarred with holes wide enough to march a company through. Constantine XI, who could have fled the city by ship days earlier and chose not to, spent that night moving between the gates on horseback, checking every post himself. Everyone inside that city understood what the next morning would likely decide. History remembers it as a foregone conclusion. AXIOM's simulation disagrees. It was close enough on that one morning that a single unlocked door changed which version of the next 500 years actually happened. Here is the detail history remembers as a footnote. In the northern stretch of the walls stood a small postern gate called the Kerkoporta, built for quick sorties out and back rather than for holding a line. On the morning of the final assault, in the chaos of the last defense, someone left it unlocked. No name survives, no court record, just a door that should have been sealed and was not. A group of Ottoman soldiers, somewhere close to 50 men, found it open, climbed the tower directly above it and raised their banner over the wall. Word of that flag spread through the Ottoman ranks faster than any general could have coordinated an actual breakthrough. On the Byzantine side, that same moment coincided with something worse. Their Genoese commander, Giovanni Giustiniani, one of the few professional soldiers holding the line, was struck by gunfire and carried off the wall for treatment. The defenders did not watch their fortifications get physically overrun. They watched their most visible commander disappear from the wall at the exact moment an enemy flag appeared where one should never have been possible. That combination, not the cannon and not the numbers, is what broke 11 centuries of resistance in a matter of minutes. AXIOM isolates this as the true fracture point of the entire siege. Not because the city could have held forever against a besieger with Mehmed's resources. It likely could not have. But the manner of the fall and the exact morning it happened mattered enormously to everything that came after it. So the simulation changes exactly one variable. The Kerkoporta stays locked. Giustiniani's wound is treated fast enough to keep him visible and commanding on the wall. No flag appears where the defenders never expected to see one. Run the timeline forward from there. If you have watched enough of these simulations to know how AXIOM works, you already suspect this is not going to be a simple story about a city that gets saved. You are right. Stay with the model. Dawn breaks on May 29th, and the walls are still Byzantine. This matters more than it sounds like it should, because Mehmed was not simply besieging a fortress, he was besieging his own legitimacy. Ottoman commanders were already telling him that 53 days outside one city was too long. His own Grand Vizier, Halil Pasha, had opposed this siege from the very beginning, warning that a prolonged war at Constantinople would finally give the fractured states of Christian Europe the shared cause they had never quite managed to unite behind. Halil had rivals inside Mehmed's court who wanted the siege to succeed specifically so his warnings would be discredited. Every day the walls hold past May 29th adds weight to Halil's argument and strips authority from the faction that pushed Mehmed into the siege in the first place. In this branch, the assault stalls. The city does not fall that morning, and a stalled Ottoman siege in 1453 is not a victory sitting still for Byzantium. It is a countdown running against Mehmed personally. He now has two options: break camp, preserve his army, and preserve his throne against rivals inside his own family who are watching this failure closely. Or gamble everything on a second assault against defenders who now believe, for the first time in 7 weeks, that the walls might actually hold. AXIOM's highest probability branch has him withdraw, not defeated in open battle, delayed and politically wounded. A sultan who returns to Edirne, having failed to take the one city that would have earned him the title the Conqueror, is a sultan whose rivals start quietly calculating their odds. Constantine XI keeps his throne, his capital, and 1100 years of continuous empire. For roughly 20 more years. This is where most alternate history stops. Gate stays shut, city survives, roll the credits. AXIOM does not stop there, because a besieged, bankrupt, 50,000-person city, surrounded by an empire that can eventually field 100,000 men again, is not a saved civilization. It is a civilization that just spent its only miracle. In this branch, Byzantium survives 1453 by mortgaging itself completely to Genoa and Venice, trading trade concessions and territory for ships, loans, and mercenaries it cannot otherwise afford. It survives as a fortified outpost, still wearing the crown of Rome, dependent on Italian merchant fleets for the food and gold it can no longer produce itself. Mehmed, for his part, does not disappear. He redirects. Instead of finishing Byzantium immediately, the Ottomans spent the next 2 decades consolidating the Balkans and Anatolia, fighting Vlad III in Wallachia, absorbing the last rival Turkish beyliks that had refused to submit to his father, and building a permanent navy that did not meaningfully exist in 1453. Every one of those campaigns is a rehearsal for the siege he still intends to finish. When Constantinople finally does fall in this timeline, sometime in the late 1470s rather than 1453, it falls to an Ottoman military that is larger, wealthier, and navally competent in a way the 1453 army never was. The second siege, when it comes, does not need a lucky open gate. It simply overwhelms. There is a second cost, and it falls on the two cities that saved Byzantium in the first place. Genoa and Venice had been trade rivals for generations, and propping up the same fragile client state does not make rivals into partners. It gives them a shared prize to fight over instead. AXIOM's model shows Genoese and Venetian merchant fleets escalating from commercial rivalry into open naval conflict in the Aegean within a decade. Each one trying to lock down exclusive trading rights inside a city that can no longer defend its own harbor. Byzantium survives the siege only to become the battlefield for someone else's war. The empire still ends. AXIOM's model puts the probability of Byzantium surviving past the year 1500 in any branch at under 4%. Regardless of what happens at any single gate on any single morning. The wall was never the true variable in this simulation. The calendar was. And the calendar is where this stops being a story about one city. In our actual history, the fall of Constantinople in 1453 did two things nobody inside the city intended, and both of them reshaped Europe more than the siege itself did. It sent a wave of Byzantine scholars, men like Cardinal Desarion, fleeing west with libraries of classical Greek manuscripts that Western Europe had barely preserved on its own. They arrived in Italy right as Florence and Venice had the wealth and the appetite to turn that knowledge into the humanist Renaissance. And it placed the entire eastern end of Europe's overland trade routes to Asia under Ottoman control, which is one of the largest reasons Portugal and then Spain began seriously funding voyages to find a sea route around Africa and across the Atlantic instead of relying on land routes they no longer controlled. Delay the fall by roughly 25 years and you delay both of those triggers by roughly 25 years. Not cancel them. Byzantium was never going to last forever, and pressure on the eastern trade routes was building with or without this specific siege. But a trigger arriving on a different schedule changes exactly who is holding the money, the ships, and the political will when it finally lands. In AXIOM's model, a 1470s fall instead of a 1453 fall pushes that manuscript migration into Italy during a different generation of patrons entirely, changing who funds early humanist scholarship and where its center of gravity sits. It pushes the search for an Atlantic route to Asia later into a period when Portugal's most experienced navigators, the generation that would produce men like Bartolomeu Dias, are already deep into a different, established African route. The funding and the ambition for a westward Atlantic gamble likely lands with a different sponsor, in a different decade, under a different flag entirely. Constantinople still falls. The Renaissance still happens. Someone still crosses the Atlantic. None of it happens to the people, in the century or under the empires we actually know. This is the finding AXIOM keeps arriving at across every simulation like this one. Locking a gate does not save a civilization. It reschedules its ending and hands the fallout to a different generation, holding different alliances, different ships, and different tools. The city that refuses to fall on time does not escape history. It simply rewrites everyone else's. Simulation logged. Divergence archived. Probability of recurrence in the primary timeline effectively 0. AXIOM standing by. Every simulation AXIOM runs starts from a decision point exactly like this one. One gate, one order. One moment small enough that nobody thought to write down whose fault it was. If you want AXIOM to run the next scenario, tell us which decision point to isolate. Which single order, if it had gone differently, would have rewritten the most. End transmission.